On the morning of my sister's wedding, my parents told me it would be better if I didn't come. Years of child illness, money games, and silence followed, until receipts and grief forced the truth into the light. The text came at 9:17 a.m., while I was letting Ruby trace stars on the foggy window with her fingertip. We were parked across from the venue by the river, staring at the big white tent pitched over the lawn like a toothy grin. The message was from my mother, which meant my father had written it standing over her shoulder. It said, "It's better if you not be here today. For everyone. We need to avoid any scenes." I reread it until the words unspoled into something formless. The car's heater hummed. Ruby yawned and tucked her bald head into my arm, her knit hat slipping back a little. Her cheeks were puffy from steroids and sleepiness. She was 7, and she still smelled like baby shampoo when she was tired. "Do we go inside?" she asked, soft, hopeful, the way you talk when you're already bracing for the answer. I watched men in suits carry crates of champagne toward the tent. I watched Caroline's maid of honor step into the sun with a garment bag and hold it up like a relic. Across the river, the silver water moved on like it didn't care about anyone's plans. "No," I said, and tasted metal. "We're not going." Ruby's hand smudged another star on the glass, then lifted and hovered in the air. She'd begged to be there. Caroline was her favorite person after me and the therapy dog at the hospital, and we'd promised we would find a way, even if she got tired halfway through and I had to carry her. I had her dress in a garment bag, yellow and soft and wrinkled, because despite my best efforts, it always got wrinkled. "Why?" she said. "Because boundaries. Because money. Because shame dressed as decorum. Because I'd made the mistake of thinking saying no would be heard as love, not insubordination. Because my parents loved the idea of family more than the work of it." I said, "They don't want us there." Ruby pressed her mouth into a line. Then she nodded, once, like a grown woman on a jury delivering a verdict she didn't believe in. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the tent. If vanishing could make a sound, it would be that first quiet crunch of tires over gravel, leaving a place everyone else was walking toward. Before it broke. If you stand on the South Bridge in Riverton and look east, you can see the hospital, the school, and the old mill all lined up like an equation you already know the answer to. I grew up 2 miles from there, in a split-level house with a green door and peeling white shutters. My mother, Susan, loved wraparound cardigans and lists. My dad, Phil, loved the Cleveland Browns and an argument he could win. I was the older daughter, 3 years ahead of Caroline. She was all legs and sunshine, the kind of girl neighbors claimed like a win for the block. I was the one who made A's and felt like a scab for it. In pictures, I notice how often I'm watching the lens, checking myself, and how often Caroline is in motion, mid-laugh, trustworthy in her joy. That's important, I think, because later, everything that should have been simple, helping with a sick child, showing up to a hospital, letting your kid spend her own money, became about who we each had always been in my parents' heads. Caroline was the sparkling bride-in-waiting. I was the one who made too much of everything. The reliable mule, but also the problem. I got pregnant at 24 with Ruby. Her dad, Eric, is a good man who wasn't a good partner to me and turned out to be an even worse fit for parenthood. We tried. The trying looked like damp grocery lists and counseling sessions with chairs that squeaked when you shifted your weight. He left when Ruby was 4, a clean cut with a dull knife. Child support came sometimes. Apologies came more often. We were always cordial at drop-offs. Then he moved to Dayton, and the drop-offs got replaced by FaceTime calls where he asked her about school and didn't know what questions to ask when she said she was scared of the sun. At the start, Ruby was a regular kid who ate strawberries with a terrible seriousness and kept rocks in her pockets, like she might need to build a castle on a moment's notice. She had a laugh that bounced around the house and landed in the corners. The spring she turned 5, small things started sticking to her, bruises, low fevers, and then one day she fell asleep sitting up in the back seat and I couldn't nudge her awake, and the nurse at urgent care spoke in a voice like a poem about white blood cells. And suddenly we had an oncologist. Riverton Regional is the kind of hospital you learn the smell of. Pine cleaner and coffee. Hand gel and bleach. There's a long hallway on the 5th floor where, if you walk all the way to the end, there's a window that looks out over the river. Ruby liked to press her forehead to that glass and narrate Carr's red one, blue one, as if they needed a witness to the simple fact of their passing. The day we learned the name, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, I could have swallowed my tongue and no one would have noticed. Dr. Patel, who was about my age and wore the same gray cardigan every Tuesday, said it like he was saying weather. Treatable. Protocol. Success rates. We nodded, because nodding is a job, and we took home a binder with tabs that made it look like a class we could study for. Chemo came like ocean waves you swear will stop at your shins and then don't. Hair fell out. We shaved it because no one should have to feel like they're being abandoned by their own body. Neutropenic fevers sent us to the ER at midnight, at 2 a.m. at dawn. Ruby learned words that kids should never have to know, learned where the sedatives live, learned that it's okay to cry even if a hand is holding a needle steady. People moved around us like a weather system. Nurses quietly heroic. Social workers who kept granola bars in drawers for mothers who forgot lunch. Volunteers who read books and gave parents permission to run to the bathroom alone. My parents came once a week, like a bench you could sit on but not lean against. They brought pre-cut fruit and disapproval. My mother fluffed pillows as if something might be solved by a crisp line in a case that was too soft to hold anything. She said, "You're strong," in a tone that meant, "Don't make this hard for us." She said, "You can't fall apart," which is something you only say if you've never had to put yourself back together on a hospital bathroom floor. There was money. There's always money, even if you don't want there to be. I had a job at the library that I loved, which turned into remote when possible, and then into it's okay, just do what you can. The bills doubled while the days halved. We started a GoFundMe because my friend Jenna at the hospital all but forced me to, after I spent 3 hours on hold with insurance and promised to sell my car to cover a sudden copay. The comments on the page made me cry for all kinds of reasons. Strangers with $5 and a note. "This is all I have," wrote like we were already friends. My parents shared it on Facebook with photos where they looked grim and noble. They loved the performance of caring. They loved the lines they wrote themselves into. My father liked to talk about how our family had always been resilient, how we had always handled our own business. He said we like he was including me in a team, and not like he was standing on the sidelines with his arms crossed, grading. Then there was the old money I didn't know about. When my grandpa Ed died, he left something small set aside for each grandchild in a custodial account. I only learned this because my mother mentioned it in a list of things I should be more grateful for, and I said, "Wait, what?" There was a 529 plan in Ruby's name, about $12,000 that could be used for school or medical. My parents were the custodians. That was the first time I learned a word that would become a weight, custodian. It sounds so sensible, like a person who cleans up, who takes care. At first, the idea was we would use some of it for a tutor because Ruby missed so much school, and for the occupational therapy insurance wouldn't cover. My mother made spreadsheets. My father nodded. "Whatever Ruby needs," he said, which in his mouth is another way of saying, "until it inconveniences me." By then, Caroline had moved back to Riverton from Cincinnati, where she lived in a one-bedroom with 3 plants and a view of a parking garage she swore looked like a city skyline at night. She was working at a boutique that sold dresses with names like Magnolia and Sunday Morning. She started planning her wedding the second they set down a date, which, to be fair, is entirely on brand for her. Connor, her fiancé, is a decent man with a laugh that makes you want to laugh too. He has a jaw like a geometry problem and the kind of parents who know where the good wine is at all times. I liked him. I liked them. The problem wasn't the wedding. It was what the wedding pulled into the gravity of our family, the way it made all the invisible lines visible and demanded each of us pick a side. When I picture the months before the wedding, the colors are off. Everything is a little too bright or washed out, like someone messed with the filters and then forgot the original settings. There were afternoons at the park when Ruby felt good that felt like winning the lottery. There were days when a fever grabbed her by the ankles and dragged her back into the hospital bed like it owned her. Caroline took me to lunch at the place by the courthouse where judges sit and have tuna melts like they're not making decisions that split families in half. She brought a wedding binder the size of a phone book and buttered her roll in neat, delicate motions. For the venue deposit, she said, I think Mom and Dad are going to use some of the custodial thing. They said Grandpa Ed would want it to be used for family. I chewed, swallowed, inhaled so softly the straw in my water glass clicked against ice. Whose custodial thing? I asked. Well, technically it's Ruby's, she said, because there it was, out loud. But it's all family money. People say it's all family money when they're standing on the side of the family that will be taken care of anyway. It's in her name, I said. It's for her. Caroline made a sympathetic face and touched my hand like we were allies. I know. Mom said they would replace it when they sell the lake cabin. We don't have a lake cabin. There's a lake we drove to once a summer where Dad would lecture us about rip currents like we were planning to swim to Canada. There is no cabin. I said, there's no cabin, and her face folded. And even if there were, that money isn't for a party. It's for Ruby's future. I could see the thought move through her like a wind that barely ruffled the surface. I could see it snag on the part of her that reads all tension as someone else's fault. Don't say party, she said. It's our wedding. And it's not like this is just for me. It's for the whole family. It's something happy. It's hard to argue with happy. It's hard to be the person who sets a boundary that looks like a denial of joy. I let the server clear our plates. I let Caroline keep talking about flower walls and something called a champagne cart as if the words didn't scrape at me with every syllable. When my mother brought it up, it wasn't even a topic so much as a plan already in motion. She stood in my kitchen with a bag of pre-sliced apples and said, "We put down the deposit today. I'll send you the paperwork to sign." What paperwork? Just something the bank needs to release the funds. For Ruby's 529? Don't be dramatic, she said, without looking up. It's not like she's using it. I stared at the back of her head. Something went cold in my chest, the kind of cold that makes you think you might never be warm again. She's 6, I said. She'll use it. If she goes to college, my father said from the doorway, suddenly part of the conversation, like he'd been waiting for his cue. It's all up in the air. We need to be pragmatic. No one uses pragmatic when they're about to do something fair. What if you took a small loan? I asked, forcing my voice steady. Or scaled down. You can have a beautiful wedding without. He cut me off with a look, the one that said, enough. We're handling it, he said. You don't need to make everything into a crisis. People say you make everything into a crisis when they've already decided they're going to light a match and then blame you for the fire. I called the bank. I talked to a woman named Denise who sounded like she had already had 3 conversations just like mine that morning. She told me my parents were, in fact, the custodians, and they had requested access to the funds. She told me my signature would make it faster. What if I don't sign? I asked. Well, it could cause a delay, she said carefully. And the custodians still have authority to use the funds for the benefit of the minor. How is a 4-figure floral wall a benefit to my kid? I asked. There was a pause. Silence that isn't empty. Silence that is a person choosing to say less than they know. You could request an accounting, she said. And you could petition the court if you think there's a misuse. After I hung up, I made pasta for Ruby, so I had something to do with my hands. We watched her favorite cartoon, and she kept dropping her fork because it was heavy to her, because some days everything weighed more. At the next infusion, Dr. Patel asked gently if I had a plan for out-of-pocket costs for an experimental med he was recommending. The plan was no, but I didn't say that. I nodded, like it was my job. When my parents came that week, I told them no. I told them the money stayed where it was. I braced for argument, for power plays, for the way my father is a dam in conversation, impenetrable, rising higher the more water you add. What surprised me was my mother's pout, a hard, cold thing I had never seen on her face before, and would then recognize over and over for the next 2 years. How can you be like this? She said. How can you take something happy away from your sister? I'm trying not to take anything from my daughter, I said. She won't even remember, she said. She. My father said her name, and the sentence broke off. We all stared at Ruby, who was sleeping with her mouth open a little, her chest rising and falling like she was no heavier than a thought. At night, I lay on the hospital cot and texted legal aid. It took 2 days for someone to call me back. A woman named Nina with a low, calm voice explained the process in a way that made it feel like there was a road where I could put one foot in front of the other and land somewhere I couldn't yet see. Petition. Accounting. Receipts. It takes a long time to go through the proper channels when the people you are trying to hold accountable are also the people who gave you your middle name. The line crossed. The rehearsal dinner was at a place on the river with light-up letters that said love on the deck like the concept needed staging. We had gotten out of the hospital that morning after a night of sustained fever that made the morning feel like a prize. Ruby wore the yellow dress because she wanted to. She wore it over her leggings, sensible shoes, and one of my sweatshirts because it was still early spring and the wind off the water has opinions about sleeveless anything. I told Caroline we'd come for pictures and then probably have to go. She texted back 3 heart emojis and no stress. Seriously, which I wanted to believe meant what it said. When we arrived, my mother met us at the entrance like a hostess who'd been told there was a noise complaint. Hat off, she said, reaching for Ruby's knit cap. She has no hair, I said. It's a nice restaurant, she said. Then they should be nice to kids who are trying to survive it. Caroline slid between us like oil in a pan. She hugged Ruby and called her Rue and told her she was the sunshine of this whole thing. Ruby beamed and clasped her hands around Caroline's wrist like she might never let go. I stepped back and tried to let that be the thing that mattered. We sat. We ate salmon. The best man told a story about college that made Connor's face go red. Ruby put her cheek on my arm and said in the smallest whisper, "I don't feel good." I put a hand on her forehead and knew we had 20 minutes, maybe, before we had to leave. Halfway through the salad course, the maid of honor, Caroline's best friend Kayla, who had a voice like a megaphone on a playground, came from the head table to our corner. She said, "Hey, babe, we're doing a no-kids photo set in 5. Do you think you could, step out?" She smiled like good intentions were a physical object she could place in my lap. "No," I said. Her smile faltered. "What?" "Ruby stays." Kayla looked at me the way you look at someone who hasn't got the memo. Then she glanced over her shoulder at my mother, whose face was a careful blank. "The photographer is on a schedule," Kayla said, "which is how you elevate a preference to a principal." I took a breath. I said, "We'll do 1 picture and then leave." That was me giving. That felt like surrender. We lined up on the deck. The wind took Ruby's hat and set it in motion across the planks like a tiny tumbleweed. She laughed and chased it, and my parents' faces did a small flinch that said they wished she would behave like she was more grateful to be there. The photographer had us tilt our chins. Caroline did that thing where she snuggled into Connor's chest like the universe had made a carved-out space specifically for her happiness. It was beautiful. It was all the things. After the posed pictures, we went back inside. I packed up our things. I slung Ruby's bag over my shoulder and bent down to lift her, but she said, "No, I can walk," even though her knees had started to tremble. At the door, my mother pressed a folded envelope into my hand. When I opened it later, it would be a kindly be advised letter drafted by my father, with notes about how a wedding is a delicate operation and how it had come to their attention that my presence had become volatile. But in that moment, I didn't know that. In that moment, I just saw that she had handed me something with a hardness that felt like a slap. "Tomorrow," she said in a low voice, "please, if you come, just stand at the back." "I thought we were sitting with family," I said. She did a small, unhappy laugh. My father said, "We can't have a scene." We got home. I put Ruby in the bath because baths were her sadness cure. The steam softened her anxiety. She had a rash on her arms that looked like a map if you stared long enough. She hummed under her breath, the way kids do when they've worn themselves out with being brave. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Caroline, sent to a group that included our parents and me and Kayla and Connor, and I think maybe half the bridal party by accident. It said, "I can't have her ruin this, I can't. Mom, please handle it." Underneath, from my mother, "I will." The bathwater became suddenly too bright, too loud. I sat on the closed toilet seat and tried to breathe through my nose. I thought about all the times I had made space for them. The baby showers, the graduation, the move back to Riverton where I stored half of Caroline's apartment in my garage for a year. I thought about how Ruby slept with a stuffed rabbit she named Light because she said it holds the morning for me. I wrote Caroline, we won't be there. My mother texted at 9:17 a.m. the next day anyway, to make sure the instruction was clean. It's better if you not be here today. For everyone. We need to avoid any scenes. I parked across the street. I watched what I was missing. Then I put us in drive and left Riverton for a place I'd been told not to be, which started to sound a lot like everywhere I didn't need to keep proving I deserved to stand. The plan or the breaking point. I told myself I was going to my friend Jenna's place for the weekend. She had a spare room while she was between roommates. That was my plan, my small, respectable plan. Pack a bag. Put Ruby in pajamas. Pretend this was a trip, not an exile. We got to Jenna's apartment over the bakery at the corner of 5th and Main. The smell through the vents at dawn is enough to make you forgive almost anything. I tucked Ruby into the bed by the window and watched her twitch from the kind of deep sleep that is less a rest than a rehearsal for doing it without thinking. Jenna poured wine into coffee mugs and handed one to me. Do you want a lock for the door? She asked. I have a spare. I don't think they'll come, I said, though my eyes were on my phone like it might perform a trick. They didn't call. They didn't write. There was a silence you could set a glass on. When you said vanish, Jenna said, sitting cross-legged, what did you mean? I sipped. The wine was too sweet. The mug had a chipped lip. I mean no calls returned, I said. No text messages. Block them. Change the email I use for family. Tell the school to update the pickup list to friends only. File the petition with the court and have everything go through Nina. That's not vanishing, Jenna said. That's a boundary. It feels like disappearing, I said. From a version of myself. Maybe that version had it coming. We made a list. I am the kind of woman who feels safer with a list. Jenna wrote in neat, necessary print. We said, call Nina. Photograph everything. Email Denise at the bank at exactly 9 a.m. Monday to request a full accounting of withdrawals. Draft an email to Caroline that wasn't a screen. Draft another one that was, and then delete it. Double-check Ruby's med bag. Pack duplicates. Buy a second thermometer in case the first one goes missing. Do you want to tell Eric? Jenna asked. I did. I wanted him to tell me he was coming and to show up with groceries and a decent joke. I wanted him to be the guy who, when a storm blew off your roof, knew someone with tarps. But by then, Eric was 21 months into a new life. He texted me on Tuesdays and Fridays and decided to call on Sundays if the game wasn't on. When I said, I'm scared, he would say, about what? In a tone that could have been curiosity or could have been confusion about what, exactly, might be more important than the piece of furniture he was assembling. I texted him anyway. I said, we're taking a break from family. He wrote back, okay, got it, is everything okay? I said yes, because typing no made my thumbs ache. On Monday, Ruby slept in and then threw up, and the rest of the day unfolded accordingly. I called Nina at lunch and got her voicemail and said, it's me, I want a file. She called at 3 and walked me through exactly where to go and who to see and how to avoid the clerk who always looks for a reason to tell you to come back tomorrow. The petition to compel an accounting was 2 pages of simple sentences that felt like a fight song. Nina said, you're not doing anything wrong. How will my mother say it? I asked. She'll call you ungrateful, Nina said. She'll say you're dragging the family through mud. She'll say none of this would be happening if you hadn't made it into a thing. She'll say you are punishing them for being better off. Do not answer to that. You are doing your job as Ruby's mother. You are requesting receipts. I took Ruby to the park behind Jenna's building when the light softened. She made me push her on the swing and then had to sit down on the mulch because her breaths got short. A girl in sparkly shoes asked what was wrong with her. Ruby said, I'm tired of having to say it, and the girl nodded like that was the only explanation anyone should ever need. We found a house to rent in a different school district 10 minutes away, but far enough to feel like my parents would need a new map. It had a porch and a tree out front that looked like it wanted someone to give it a name. I put down a deposit with a credit card I shouldn't have used and picked up the keys from a landlord who smelled like aftershave and told me I could paint but not go wild. I moved while Ruby was at a hospital playgroup, which sounds like an oxymoron but isn't. I put the quilts in boxes and the forks in a shoe. I left the framed photos in the garage because I knew how it would feel to have my mother's face on my new wall. I left a note in the old kitchen drawer that said, "This isn't an emergency. Please don't make it one." They made it one anyway. The first call came from my father's office phone. Then a number I didn't recognize left a message that had my mother's breath behind it. Then Kayla texted, a paragraph where every sentence began with "I'm just worried" and ended with "You're going to regret this." At the new house, the neighbors brought us muffins and didn't ask questions they didn't deserve answers to. A boy across the street showed Ruby the hide-and-seek ground rules for this block specifically. It was hot in the afternoons, and there was a sweetness in the air that I couldn't place until I saw the honeysuckle climb the chain link behind the garage like it was trying to escape and make something beautiful at the same time. At night, in the new quiet, I deserted my phone face down on the counter and slept with Ruby's socked feet pressed against my shins. I woke up feeling like I had been holding my breath in my sleep. Denise from the bank called me back 7 days after the petition went through. The first thing she said was, "I wanted to give you a heads up." On what? "You're going to see charges that will upset you," she said. I shouldn't say that, but if I were you, I would want to know before I opened the envelope. The envelope, rich cream, like an invitation, came on a Thursday. Nina sat at my kitchen table while I slit it open with a butter knife. Ruby was at school for 2 hours because the world sometimes gives you 2 hours and it's either a gift or a dare. The printouts were specific. A withdrawal for $3,750 to Stonecrest event venue. A check to Bella and Bloom Bridal, memo line, veil, and alterations. Charges at a liquor store 80 miles away. A florist in Columbus that had a driveway lined with hydrangeas, as if the owners wanted you to understand what you were about to spend. "You're kidding me," I said. Nina shook her head. "I'm not. Do they think we're dumb?" My voice was calm. It felt like I had taken it to a place where it could stand out of the wind. "They think they'll never have to show anyone," she said. In the stack, there was one charge at a jewelry store. "What's this?" I asked. Nina turned it around. "It's your sister's ring. You know that feeling when your bones suddenly belong to someone else and you're just borrowing them?" My body did that. I thought about my mother filling out the cards that would go in the welcome baskets for the hotel. I thought about my father standing at a bar he didn't pay for and toasting the family. I thought about Ruby's 529 losing numbers like weight. I wanted to text Caroline a picture of the statement and just write, "You know." But I also knew what I would get back. Variations of "we didn't know," "we thought it was a gift," "we thought you knew," "we thought you wouldn't mind," "we thought." I sent one email to my sister. It said, "There's an accounting. I know everything. I'm asking you to come look at it before I file anything that can't be undone. If you didn't know, say that. If you did, say that. Come be in the truth, please." She asked me to meet at the park by the amphitheater where the summer concerts always made the town feel like a movie. I got there early. There were kids in soccer uniforms kicking balls they had very clear opinions about. Caroline walked toward me in a dress you can't wear if you think you might have to run. She hugged me like she was afraid someone was watching. "I didn't know," she said right away, like she had been practicing it. "Okay," I said. I laid the statements on the bench between us. "Then I need you to look." She did. Her fingers shook. She touched her face like she was checking to see if it was still there. She scanned numbers, then dates. She pointed at the ring charge and said, "Connor paid for mine." The sound of her voice made me want to believe her. Maybe she was telling the exact truth about that one thing. Maybe she wasn't. "They did this," I said, and she didn't disagree. "The next step is court. Nina says we can try to do a consent judgment to make them pay it back without a fight, but they have to admit it publicly. If we have to go to a hearing, we will. This will be in a record. It's your call if you want to stand next to me or not." "I don't want to stand against you," she said. She said it like what she wanted mattered more than what would happen. "Okay," I said. "You don't have to. You could come clean. You could make a statement. Or you could say you didn't know, and you could be okay with the fact that I don't believe you." She took a breath. Do you want some of the gifts?" "What?" People sent cash, she said, blinking. Cards with cash. Connors and gave us, she stopped. It was like watching someone realize the story they'd told themselves had holes, and that those holes were big enough for them to fall through. I'm not doing this right, am I? You can't do this right, I said gently. There isn't a right anymore. She started to cry. She said, they told me you would make it about you. I'm making it about Ruby, I said. That's my job. That's my only job. Mom says you told her she can't come to the hospital anymore. I thought about the way my mother sighed when the nurse showed up with meds. I thought about the time she told Ruby, don't act sick. You're fine. I thought about my daughter staring at the ceiling with her jaw clenched so tight that I had to pry it open to get the anti-nausea tablet in. I thought about asking my mother to put her phone away during a procedure and watching her check notifications in the reflection of the dark TV screen instead. I said no visits unless you can be kind, I said. She chose not to be. Caroline was quiet. She put her palm on the paper like it might steady her. What happens now? Now, I said, they either agree to return the money or a judge tells them to. And then I move on, because I don't have time to argue with people who think they have a right to my child's life to fund their parties. I'll talk to them, she said. I'll make them see. Don't make anything, I said. Just tell the truth. Before I left, she hugged me and said, I love you. I wanted to say it back, but the words had too many tangled threads. I said, I know, which was true, and which was also a verbal door that could softly, slowly close. Nina filed the paperwork the next morning. 2 days later, my parents called me nonstop. I didn't answer. They sent an email that began with, as you know, and ended with, we consider this a family matter and will not be humiliated by public proceedings. I considered that they should have considered that before humiliating themselves with purchases. The hearing was scheduled for mid-September, a date that hung like a storm cloud you can see from your porch and pretend, for a while, isn't moving your way. School started again. Ruby insisted on going, on being the kid who sits on the rug during morning meeting and watches a teacher draw a calendar in boxes and talk about weather symbols. I bought her a backpack with astronauts and a pencil case that felt like hope zipped up. On day 10, she woke up with a fever so fast it felt like a magic trick. We were back at Riverton Regional by noon, in a room that was a twin of every room. Dr. Patel's hair looked a little more gray. He said, we're in a tricky stretch, and I leaned on the counter and said, we've done tricky, because bravado is a kind of prayer you make to yourself. The consent judgment hearing was a Tuesday in a courtroom with a humming air conditioner and wood benches that made my knees ache. Nina sat next to me with her legal pad. My parents sat on the other side, back straight, looking like they were prepared to be judged, but did not recognize any judge's authority over their private family decisions. Caroline sat behind them, eyes on the floor. The judge, an exhausted man with a voice like gravel, asked basic questions. He asked Denise to explain the account. He asked my parents if the withdrawals listed were for the benefit of Ruby Green. My father said, the family benefited, and the judge raised one eyebrow in a way that made me remember there are adults in the world who know what it is to hold a line. Return the funds with interest, the judge said. He didn't even sound angry. He sounded like he was reciting a recipe. Within 90 days. If they are not returned in full, I will entertain contempt penalties. It's strange how victory feels like relief mixed with shame. I didn't want any of it. I wanted my parents to have been the kind of people who would put their own wedding on layaway before they touched what belonged to my kid. But the order was on record. Nina squeezed my hand. Caroline looked up and mouthed, I'm sorry. My mother watched me like I had stuck a fork in a socket and the light had bounced back on her instead. On the way out, my father caught my arm. Not hard, but too tight. He said, you're not coming back from this. I stood there in the hallway where they hang portraits of judges like family photos. I thought about the day Ruby threw up in the car, and I had to choose between pulling over on the shoulder or trying to make it to the exit. I thought about how the answer is always the shoulder. You pull over. You do what you need to do. I didn't go anywhere you wouldn't send me, I said. I'm exactly where you put me. We never got the money back in full. We got most of it, in chunks, like they were force-feeding integrity in doses. We signed a settlement that let them keep the difference if they made monthly payments. The lawyer for the other side, some man in a suit too shiny to be trustworthy, made a face when I wouldn't agree to let the order be sealed. No, I said. People should know what you did. You're cruel, my mother said in the hallway. I stood a foot from her and tried, for a second, to remember her face at my high school graduation. I wanted to borrow that version of her and ask her, did this feel inevitable to you? Then Ruby got sicker. There's a pivot point in long illnesses when you can feel the road shift beneath your tires. You're on a down slope, whether or not you admit it. We went from a plan that had charts to a plan that had palliative at the top. I hated that word like it had personally lied to me. It just sat there, soft and heavy, on the pages of the new binder. We stopped thinking about school schedules and started thinking about who would sit with her after midnight when sounds get too loud and thoughts get sharp. I learned where her pain lived and how to talk to it. I learned how to advocate in a voice that never rose above a whisper because whispers make people lean in. At 3:06 a.m. on a Tuesday, Ruby woke me up and said, I want to see the water. I told her it was night. She told me the water doesn't stop for night. I buckled her into the car in a blanket and drove us to the South Bridge because you can't go stand by the river at night without making a parking attendant suspicious. We sat in the car and rolled the windows down. The river moved. She breathed in the cool air and exhaled like she had been holding her breath from the beginning. I'm not scared of it, she said. It looks like little lights are hiding in it. You're not scared, I said, because you're braver than anyone I know. I don't like being brave, she said. I like being funny. I thought about that for a long time. I had stopped checking my phone. If a call came, I let it ring. If an email subject line said any version of please reconsider, I archived it. Nina told me to keep a special folder for harassment. I had a plastic envelope in a drawer labeled if needed. On a Thursday in November, Ruby didn't wake up. I sat with my cheek on her forehead for an hour, half sure I could quiet my own blood enough to hear hers again. Jenna came and called the numbers. Nurses came and checked the boxes. A woman with kind hair asked me questions that I answered and then couldn't remember answering, which is a level of rote I didn't know humans could operate on. We had a service at River's funeral home. I chose the smallest room because large felt like a lie. I asked that there be no overhead fluorescent lights. I asked that people bring stones instead of flowers, and I set out paint pens on a table by the door. Someone brought an iPod and a speaker and played a playlist I made of songs Ruby would dance to in the kitchen when it was good. My parents came. They were early. My mother tried to put a framed photo of all four of us on a stand near the guest book. I took it down and set it on a chair. She came to me and said, "This is bigger than your pride." I said, "Then be big," and turned away. Halfway through the service, my father stood up and took a step toward the lectern. I held up my hand. He froze. He looked like he didn't recognize my hand, like it had been replaced by a stranger's hand in the night. "No speeches," I said softly. "You can't stop me," he said. "You're right," I said. "I can't. But I can ask what you would have done if I had used your money for something that made you feel like you had disappeared in your own life." "There are people here," he said. "There are always people here," I said. "That's been the problem." He stepped back. My mother put a tissue in her mouth and chewed on it like it could pretend to be restrained. After we painted stones, after we sang the one song Ruby asked me for, not the sad one, the other one, Caroline came to me. She held out a small velvet box. "I don't want anything," I said. "It's not from me," she said. "It's from Ruby." She opened the box. Inside was a piece of sea glass on a thin chain, blue as the river on a clear day. I recognized it from a craft fair we went to once, where Ruby had held it and declared it water you can keep. "She told me to give this to you when she wasn't here," Caroline said. "She wasn't planning on not being here," I said. "I know," she said. "She also told me to tell you that you're not bossy, you're a boss." Ruby had said that to me in the hospital once when I was on the phone with insurance. She had whispered, "You're a boss," and then raised her eyebrows like we were doing a bit. A laugh jumped out of me and then made me angry at myself for laughing. The weeks after the funeral were a kaleidoscope you could not stop turning. The house was too quiet. The refrigerator was too full because people brought meals as a love letter to our hunger when it was not hunger that ached. I found Ruby's toothbrush and sat on the bathroom floor holding it like a talisman. On day 12, My mother called and left a voicemail that began with "Now that this is over" and ended with a suggestion that we talk about returning any leftover GoFundMe money. I forwarded it to Nina with the subject line, "For the file." Eric started coming by twice a week. He took off work and took out the trash and didn't ask for absolution. We watched a show on my laptop where people renovate houses, and I realized this is what grief is sometimes, watching other people fix things you cannot. At some point in December, I went to the river and stood on the south bridge and dropped the sea glass into my palm. I thought about throwing it. Then I imagined Ruby's face and how very much she would rat me out to myself and probably to everyone else if I did. I put it back in my pocket. I leaned over the rail and watched the water move on, relentless and indifferent and somehow still a mercy. Grief is an animal that lives in your house and eats when you aren't looking. You can forget to feed it and it still grows. I rearranged the furniture twice and then put everything back where it had been. I made a rule for myself where I had to go somewhere new once a week or I would become part of the couch. I joined a grief group at the hospital where a man named Walt, who lost his wife in June, brought donuts every time and insisted that we score our days on a scale of 1 to 10 like we were rating a movie. Nina closed our case. The last payment from my parents came in January, a check with a note in my mother's handwriting that said, "We hope this satisfies you." She is the kind of person who thinks money can be a substitute for anything she doesn't want to look at. I stamped the envelope with "received" and put it in the "if needed" folder anyway, because I am also the kind of person who will always be ready to open a drawer and pull out proof. I was offered my job back at the library and took it in a small way at first, shelving books when my brain could handle the order and the alphabet felt like a handhold. A boy asked me where the dinosaur books were and I led him there and he said, "Do you like ankylosauruses?" And I said, "It's hard to spell, but yes," and that felt like an entire weekend of sun. Caroline called me once in February and asked if I would meet her for coffee. I said yes, and then stared at the inside of my wallet for 10 minutes, because it smelled like a past that suddenly felt like someone else's. We met at the place by the courthouse where the judges go, but we sat at the back, the way you sit when you're braced for someone to recognize your face and attach it to the person you were in a room you didn't want to be in. She said, "I'm pregnant," by way of hello. "Okay," I said. The word held how happy I would have been in another life. It held the fact that I didn't know how to be that happy for her and also be sad for myself without the two turning into each other and becoming nothing. She said, "I'm scared," and I looked at her and realized I had not considered her fear in a long time. Of what? That the baby won't be okay, she said. That I'll be punished. We're not being punished, I said. It's not like that. It feels like that, she said. I know, I said. We drank coffee. She told me Connor had gone quiet after the hearing, and that it had lasted longer than either of them intended. She told me my parents had stopped bringing up money and started bringing up how ungrateful I am instead, like it's a charm they can wear around their necks to protect them from their own choices. I told her if she wanted to know what to name a middle schooler's favorite dinosaur, I am now the person to ask. We met once a week after that. Sometimes we didn't talk about anything. Sometimes we talked about Ruby on purpose. Sometimes we talked about her because everything reminded me of her anyway. Once, Caroline brought a stack of photos in a paper bag and slid them across the table like she was offering contraband. The pictures smelled like my childhood living room, the weird combination of lemon cleaner and dust. There was one of the four of us at the county fair, and I looked at my parents' faces the way you look at a new species. I couldn't recognize them anymore without their defense mechanisms attached. Caroline had the baby in late September. A girl. She named her June, and I didn't know how to feel about that except that when I held her the first time, the world narrowed to the warm weight of a small person breathing against my shoulder, and I remembered how to be still. I kissed June's forehead and thought, I will not fail you, which is a big promise to make to anyone, especially a person who will wake you up at 4 in the morning just because she can. My parents didn't talk to me for almost a year. Then my father sent a terse text that said, "Your grandmother is sick. We should consider what's next." It took me 5 minutes to realize he meant my mother. I responded with, "I'm sorry she's sick. Tell her I hope her doctors are kind." He wrote back, "She misses you," and I stared at the words until they blurred. I wrote, She misses the version of me she could control. He didn't answer. Once, in early spring, I saw my father at the hardware store. He was holding a pack of nails like he had figured out exactly how to fix something. We stood in the same aisle for 30 seconds and pretended we didn't know each other, which is a kind of truce. He picked up a hammer. I picked up a plant that I would probably keep alive through sheer stubbornness. We moved on. I started volunteering with the hospital's playgroup, the one where Ruby had once made a glitter explosion and then apologized for nothing. A boy there named Deshaun liked trucks and didn't like sharing and had a face that made you want to buy him a fleet of vehicles he could crash into each other. He put a plastic fire truck in my lap and said, "Make a noise," and I did, and he laughed like I had created something worth keeping. At night in my new kitchen, I tried recipes that required more than 3 steps. It felt like I was asking my hands to remember they were useful for things other than holding on. The river doesn't heal you. It just keeps moving. Some days, that's enough of a lesson. I walk to the South Bridge sometimes and stand with the glass of my phone warm in my pocket. The sea glass hangs in my kitchen window, where the light hits it at exactly the time of day I used to settle Ruby for a nap. It casts a small blue circle on the counter, a water you can keep promise I didn't know I needed. What I learned. It's a strange thing to be told not to come to a day your absence stands in as an unspoken success. I could have fought my way into that tent, into those pictures. I could have apologized for wounds I didn't cause to preserve a family shape that was already broken. Instead, I left. It wasn't sexy or cinematic. It was a list. It was paperwork. It was taking my daughter to the river at 3 a.m. because she wanted to see something that kept going. Here are the things I know now. You are allowed to walk away from people who want your compliance more than your company. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're belief that you're worth protecting. Love that demands you keep your eyes down doesn't turn into a better kind of love if you just try harder. It turns into silence. Choose the noise of your own conscience over someone else's comfort. Keep receipts. It sounds crass. It's not. It's how you tell the truth when the people who benefit from the lie call you dramatic. The smallest voices in your life can hold the biggest truths. When Ruby said she was tired of explaining, what she really said was, "Believe me the first time." Found family is not a consolation prize. It's a group project that you get to build with people who don't need you to be grateful to be invited. The last time I took the sea glass down and held it, it felt warm from the sun. I thought about the water it was once part of and how it got to be soft on the edges by being tossed around. The point isn't that the ocean is kind. The point is that you can still be.